Could you introduce yourself, please?
Yeah, I'm Graham Peskett. I live at number 6 Sandford Mill cottages and have done for the last 28 years. So we're very aware of the water and flooding that we have near my cottages.
Now I'm going to introduce our presenter. This is Mike Parker.
So I've been running a campaign for the past few years called Save Sandford Mill, which has started to oppose the development at the top of the hill here. There's two developments, one on Manor Farm, one on Red Row. Now they're doing a third one, which is literally on the floodplain up at the other end by Chelmsford Village. And the trouble with all these developments is they're pouring extra surface water, extra runoff, into a floodplain which is already over capacity. You know, it's already getting to the point of flooding people's houses, backing up in Chelmsford. The gates in Chelmsford don't work, they've been broken for 20 years. Flooding's getting worse. I've looked at the data and I've seen that over the past 50 years, it now floods 3 times more than it used to. And they need to do something about it.
So you've called on number 6, and number 6 has kindly agreed to talk about things. What would you like to put as your headlines with today's flooding?
I think there's 3 things to do with the flooding. We have a floodplain which literally goes past the sides of our property. Nothing wrong with that. We have Environment Agency built some defences and we don't actually have problems with flooding, but we do have problems with the water build up against the wall. And that is because as the water goes past our property into a field, it gets stopped by the A12. The A12 obviously has the canal exit, which if you ever walk over there in the flooded areas, you'll see it's massively flooded, and there is one hole or special drain off area, I would say, which allows water to go and back up. Very badly built, actually higher than the fields, and in fact I was told many years ago there should have been 2 built to allow for the water to go, but even the one which we have currently, you have to have such a high volume of water to actually get it to access that. That is why the water backs up so high as it comes past our property.
Mike Parker, what would you say to that?
And then there's a second problem as well, which is this road up here where they built it is much higher than the ground level. So first you're holding water back there by the A12, and second you're holding water back here. So instead of allowing the natural floodplain to work as it was gouged out by glaciers thousands of years ago, it's like you're holding all this water back towards Chelmsford, starting because of that A12, which should have been built on stilts like the original A12.
What do you say to that?
I think that's definitely true, because the level of water that comes past our house, we can have up to 6 or 7 feet of water up against our flood defences, which purely if there was a bigger gap for the water to disappear, we wouldn't have that fear. My other concern is obviously they're talking about a development at Sandford Farm, behind the farm shop.
Is it Manor Farm?
Yeah, which is built on the slope, and then they have this brilliant idea which supposedly had been signed off called SUDS, where they have some lakes at the bottom of the hill which in theory will gradually allow the water to go down the plain. What they haven't realised or don't seem to care, even though I've made many a conversation with, is that the area that they're actually talking of building these things is known to flood. So the runoff water will just go straight onto the floodplain, not in their lovely designed area.
What do you say to that?
This is the same with this new stone bond development up the other end. Again, they're putting these SUD systems in, and in fact they're putting them on areas that already flood, so they're going to have a net zero effect on reducing flooding. But you've got all the extra runoff because of all the extra concrete in that development and tarmac and everything, that now adds all a load of extra water which won't be stored in the SUDs because they're underwater. It just goes out straight onto a floodplain which is already over capacity. So it's really silly. And we need to start looking at this problem properly and solving it, which they're not doing. They're just making it worse.
But the other problem with this is, and I mean this respectfully to councillors, when somebody says, oh, we've submitted this and they've signed it off, the councillors, with respect, have not got the technical knowledge to actually, they go, oh, it's just been signed off. If they were to come and look and see these areas underwater, which you can see on a fairly regular basis now, then surely their own brains would tell them you cannot have runoff supposedly storing water in areas that are flooded.
I think this is the trouble, is the council doesn't understand it at all. Right? They don't understand, and that we've got this hiving off of this responsibility is that so there was a thing a few years ago, Stephen Robinson was talking about something, and
this is Councillor Stephen Robinson.
Councillor Stephen Robinson, and they're saying that this flooding, it's all the responsibility of the Environment Agency, and it's like, well, hang on, I disagree. Exactly, it's like this is our town, our city.
When we were able to put objections into the council regarding this Sandford Mill thing, there were hundreds and hundreds of documents which me as a layperson couldn't get into. Yeah. But one of the ones I did manage to get into was the Environment Agency one. They had not been asked specifically on flooding. When I read their comments, it just basically said we tick this box and tick that box to that. But actually, nobody actually asked them what their opinion was of building 200 or 300 properties on the floodplain.
And
how can you not ask the Environment Agency?
And I'm not sure how much analysis they actually do, because I've recently done a Freedom of Information request to the Environment Agency. I wanted, one, to look at the hydrometric data of how much water is flowing in to Chelmsford, and two, to look at the rainfall data for how much is falling onto our catchment, right? So you've got what is the resource and what percentage of that ends up here, and is that percentage changing over time, right? What I wanted to look at. But they told me they don't actually hold the rainfall data for the catchment. It's like, well, so how can you have flood maps and claim that you understand flooding in this area if you don't even understand the amount of rainfall falling over the catchment? That seems crazy. but this is the system we've got, and I very much get the impression that the Environment Agency is they're like a skeleton crew locally, because they're spread out across the entire country trying to understand complex systems when they don't live here, they don't talk to residents, they don't understand what really happens. They're just basing everything on some pretty colourful picture which is just out of date.
You know from personal experience of having, did you say 6 foot of flood water in your house?
That was unfortunately in October 2000.
Not so long ago.
Well, what's that, 25 years ago, and the reason was obviously when they had a problem with the sluice gates which were at the Army and Navy, they decided due to bad maintenance the cables were frayed that they would pull out the gates. So actually
it was threatening the Meadows shopping precinct.
Well, that was the reason they gave. They quietly said they could either let Chelmsford Town Centre go under with all the shops that were there, Boots and British Home Stores and all the other multi-million-pound shops, or they could flood 10 cottages and worry about it after.
Even if that was the rationale and decision-making about that, they clearly didn't notify residents, because I read an old news story. We went round the record office a while ago looking at all these old Chronicle news stories, and there's one from that time, and there was a lady and her husband, I think, live up the top there, and the story was they were walking down the hill and suddenly they're engulfed by like 4 foot of water.
The water that arrived in my house, a very silly story, I decided to unplug the telly. I had 2 young children under 5, so I put them on the settee, unplugged the telly, managed to walk up 1 step of the upstairs and they screamed. I couldn't understand why. The reason was my sofa was afloat. So as long as it's taken me to unplug the television and go up 1 flight of one step, the amount of water. Well, you can imagine it. You know, you're pulling out sluice gates and you're just creating a tidal wave which arrived in seconds, not minutes.
Did you see the tidal wave? I mean, was it a tsunami or a tidal wave?
Well, because I was doing the saving my television, or I thought I was, I didn't, but...
Well, you weren't outside to see it, but you experienced it inside.
Well,
right?
for water to come from a completely dry house to unplug the telly and walk up one stair, and for my children to scream because the settee was afloat, you're only talking short periods of time.
So this gate that was broken 25 years ago, and it's apparent to me that's still not fixed, or it's not working reliably, because I've got photographs, managed to find photographs. The internet's a wonderful thing, Facebook. You know, local residents have taken photos, snaps, for years and years and years, and you can go back looking at these things, and I've found several pictures from recent floods of the flood barrier, which they won't call a flood barrier now, they're sluice gates, right? Even though it was built as part of a flood alleviation scheme in 1964, but they're not floodgates. But you look at those gates, and the third gate by the record office side, that gate in all of these floods I've looked at in previous years has not been open. And I understand from the people who live at Barnes Mill that even today that third floodgate, with the river being really high, is not open again. So if it works, it doesn't work reliably. And I tried to get an answer out of the Environment Agency about this, but didn't get a straight answer as to whether it actually works or not.
They probably don't know.
But we're talking about the water, the difficulties today. That is not after you've built another, I don't know, 500 houses, exactly. 600 houses, put down tons of concrete, tons of tarmac, and they keep telling me that the water that drains into the ground will actually, by the time they finish with their tarmac and concrete, they will actually manage to slow the water down entering the floodplain. I've got to say, I don't believe it.
And the other thing is, everyone only thinks about the impact of housing immediately around the floodplain. But it doesn't work like that, does it? It's the whole river system. So the whole catchment upstream of here is something like 450, 500 square kilometres. It's absolutely enormous, right? And it's all of that runoff from all of that development over that entire catchment all ends up here.
Well,
right?
there's
all of
also
that.
been comments from some people in Malden where they've just put new developments in there, and that has caused mega problems with flooding, etc. So the new estates, as you enter Malden, are causing problems, and in fact I've had it mentioned from the Environment Agency that actually slows the water flow going down. So all this water is going, but hasn't got as clear a passageway as it had 10 years ago.
Well, this is the thing. This is anything you impact on any part of the system affects the whole rest of the system. Everyone tends to talk about it affecting things downstream, but it doesn't work like that. It's like if you pour extra water into the river downstream at Malden, say, right, that's going to fill the river channel right up to its kind of capacity where it's overflowing. That's then going to hold water back all the way upstream. So what you do in any location affects everywhere else. That's how these systems
That's why it's
work.
called a body of water. It's like a human body.
Exactly.
If you do something to the leg, it affects the whole body, doesn't it?
And similarly, if the sea levels rise, when the sea levels rise, I should say, it's like that's obstructing water flowing out of the river system.
Well,
so that's going to raise water.
We see that at high tide. I can
system.
tell you, because we put markers out when the water is high, and we look at the flood times, and you see the water rise here when it's high tide in Malden
So
and
you
South
actually
End.
see that?
Oh, you could, yeah. I mean, we put stones down of how much the water is draining down or up, and you can see at high tide, etc., that the water is definitely being held, and that's why it creeps further over.
So is that why it could rain as much as it could here, as it has done with the storms, and it hasn't done the damage that this has done in 2 rainfalls because there's a high tide down
It very much depends on the tide basis, and as I say, you can sometimes have the amount of water you've got today, and if the tides are right, you come here tomorrow and it's dry because the water's had the opportunity to disappear. If it's around the wrong way, you'll see it actually increase, and we've had some flood defence boards put in 2 days after it stopped raining, and we're going, why are you putting them in? And he said, well, because it's the high water is coming back.
So has your local councillor, who represents the dwellers, the citizens, the householders of these 10 cottages, have they ever knocked at your door and
No,
said?
I've never had a councillor knock on my door.
Have you ever invited a councillor to?
I have, and basically, I will be a little bit cynical. They have a job to build a certain number of houses, and I think overall that is their most important role. They need to build X houses, and I've got to say, I don't think they really care where they build them.
So you've got nobody on your side from our elders and betters, from the council. Everyone is either keeping quiet if they disagree, or not saying a dicky bird, because we're putting...
Nobody is putting their head over the parapet and saying this is the wrong place and you shouldn't be building on floodplain.
Not one councillor from the whole of Essex County Council, from the whole of Chelmsford City Council, is breaking ranks, defying the whip.
Because if they did know this area and they come and spoke to the residents, or even walked down here, logic would tell them you do not build houses right either on or right near a floodplain.
But they're putting out a publicity slogan: greener, greener, cleaner, safer. Is that the thing that they keep churning out, saying they're greener? They're greener. On the other hand, they haven't come and spoken to anybody who lives here, let alone come and have a look at it.
They call Chelmsford a green city, and then they're building all over it. Yeah, it makes perfect sense.
But
But what this whole planning system, you've got people making decisions about things they don't understand in the slightest, based only on like a flood map produced by the Environment Agency that's well out of date, right? And it's like, you know, we've spoken about things that are complicated. I mean, I've got a scientific background. I can kind of understand quite a bit of it, and it's complicated stuff, right? It's like the impact of sea levels, the impact of runoff all across the entire catchment there, and these things are quite complicated. And you've got a planning department approving these things that doesn't understand all of that, right? And an environment agency that is so overworked, if you like, because they're spread thinly across the entire country, and that they get thousands and thousands and thousands of plans that they get 5 minutes to decide what they're going to say about it, that they have to approve or whatever on the consultations. It's a system that's just never going to come out with the right answer, is it?
but this has been improved. Let's take Beauty Park as a perfect example. Very big development, fantastic. Finally got a school. What's that? 15 years after it's done. We're going to have a railway station. What's that? 20 years afterwards. Well,
yeah, rather than infrastructure first, right?
Well, if you go to Spain or somewhere like that, I'm sure you can see places where there's roads and there's street lighting and there's sewerage and there's not a house been built yet. Here, we're going to wait and see if the flood defences work, and when we're affected, oh, never mind, we checked it on SUDS, etc., etc. Just use some common sense, use some plans that are up to date, and don't believe everything you're told, Mr. Councillor.
Graham, you've got the opportunity to speak to Chelmsford City councillors via this video. Face the camera and say, what would you like to tell them?
Come and look at what you are actually signing up to. And I would also like to make you a little promise. If I'm still alive and I get flooded due to your new development, I think perhaps I should meet you all face to face when I'm soaking wet, etc. Because my flood defences will not withstand what you're doing. And if you don't believe me, come and talk to me. Thank you.